The sound of coins clattering on the kitchen counter used to make me flinch. It meant he'd lost again. That night was worse than usual. The house smelled like cigarette smoke and sweat. The TV hummed in the background, showing a sports replay no one was watching. My father sat at the table, shirt unbuttoned, a glass of cheap whiskey in his hand, and a rage that didn't need a reason. He looked up when I walked in, his eyes bloodshot and watery. "You got paid today, right?" I hesitated. My paycheck was folded inside my wallet, barely enough for rent and groceries for me and my son. I already knew where this was going. "Yeah," I said quietly, "but I need it for bills." He slammed the glass down so hard the liquid splashed. "Bills? You think your bills matter more than family?" "Dad," I said carefully, "you owe those people thousands. I can't fix that. I can barely keep food in the fridge. Please subscribe to our channel and tell us in comments from where are you watching this video." He leaned forward, the skin around his eyes tightening. "You wouldn't even have food if it weren't for me. I raised you, didn't I?" "Raised me?" I almost laughed. "You drank, gambled, and broke everything you touched. You didn't raise me, you ruined me." The silence after that was sharp. Even the TV seemed to stop. He stood slowly, pushing the chair back with a screech. "Say that again." I didn't. I didn't need to. He grabbed the first thing he could find, the heavy black cord from the old radio that hadn't worked in years, and swung. The first hit landed across my arm, a sting like fire. The second caught my shoulder. I tried to move back, but there was nowhere to go. "You ungrateful brat," he shouted, swinging again. "You think you're better than us? You think I'm the problem? You're the reason we suffer." My body jolted with each word. The sound of the cord slicing through the air mixed with the hum of the old ceiling fan. My mother sat in the doorway, arms crossed, her expression empty. "Just give him the money," she said quietly. "He's stressed." Something inside me cracked that moment. Not a bone, not skin. Something deeper. Something that had kept me believing family meant something. When he was done, he threw the cord onto the table and reached into his pocket. "You'll transfer it tomorrow," he said, breathing hard. "If you don't, I'll find another way." He left the kitchen, muttering curses under his breath. My mother followed him, whispering something I couldn't hear. I stood there shaking, the red marks rising on my arms. The house felt like it was shrinking around me. I could hear my son's footsteps upstairs. He'd woken up. I went to him, forcing a smile I didn't feel. He was 7, small for his age, always quiet. "Mommy, did Grandpa hurt you again?" he asked softly. I swallowed hard. "No, baby. It's okay." He frowned, his little voice trembling. "You said that last time." I didn't answer. I tucked him back into bed, his small hands clutching the blanket. I sat beside him until he fell asleep, staring at the bruise on my wrist under the dim nightlight. By morning, I'd already made my decision. I wasn't going to call the police. I wasn't going to post online. That would have just made me the problem again. But I wasn't going to give him a single dollar either. Instead, I packed a bag, put my son in the car, and drove to work early. I told my manager I needed extra shifts. Anything. I didn't tell him why. I just worked until my fingers bled, saving every penny. For weeks, the calls came, first angry, then desperate, then threatening. When I didn't pick up, my mom left a message. "He's in trouble. They're coming for him. You could stop this if you wanted to." I deleted it, because maybe for once, the trouble that always found me would finally find him instead. And when it did, I planned to be ready, not to save him, but to make sure he learned what suffering really felt like. That night, as I locked the diner doors and watched the lights flicker off, I realized something. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of him. He'd taught me what cruelty felt like. Now, I was going to teach him what consequences looked like. I stopped sleeping the night I decided I wouldn't hand him another rupee. It wasn't a dramatic moment, no slammed door, no speech. Just the small, steady click of the motel clock as the light above my bed hummed and my son breathed beside me. I stared at the ceiling until dawn and thought about every time I'd given up my hope for their peace, my tips, my last dress for an interview, the small debts I'd quietly paid so they wouldn't have to look bad in front of their friends. I'd been a quiet bank for a family that never paid me back. The next morning I went to work, and I kept my face carefully blank. The regulars at the diner didn't notice the bruise because I'd learned to hide those kind of marks with a smile and flour on my apron. George slid a sandwich across the counter like he always did. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded. I wanted to say no, but the word would have opened me up in a place I didn't trust anyone to put back together. Instead, I started making a list. Practical things. Things that smelled like survival. Open a new bank account. Get a different phone number. Find extra shifts. Register my son for after-school care. Find a small room to rent where his grandfather couldn't show up and frighten him. I wrote every item in the margin of a receipt and folded it into my wallet like a prayer. He called that night. His voice was the same as always, oily and demanding. "You'll give it to me tomorrow," he said. "You know what happens if you don't." I could have answered with the tremor in my hands, the fear. Instead, I said, "No." The silence on the line was heavier than anger. "You think you can leave us?" he spat finally. "You think you're better than us?" That was the exact phrase that stopped me. The thing he'd thrown at me like a weapon so many times. Better than us. I let it hang between us. "I'm not better," I said. "I'm done being yours." He cursed and hung up. The adults downstairs in their rooms probably heard nothing. My son slept on, oblivious to the promise his small face had made me keep. Over the next 2 weeks, I became a different kind of careful. I took every extra shift George offered and cleaned every plate until my fingertips peeled. I opened a savings account in my name only and hid the ATM card taped under the register at the diner where no one would think to look. I got a second job delivering groceries on weekends, early mornings, heavy bags, quiet streets. Each night, I labeled envelopes with dates and tiny goals. Rent, 10:15, tuition, 11:01, bus pass, 10:20. The list grew. So did the money. When my father called, the sound on the other end of the line was hollow. "Your mother's talking about selling the TV," he said. "You could help, you know." "No," I said, and put the phone down. He left a message about shame and duty and how family worked. I played it back once and then deleted it. There was a part of me that wanted to be flattered, to think my refusal would sting and they'd change. They didn't. They were good at not changing. Instead, I watched. I learned their rhythms. I watched how Dad tiptoed around collectors on his phone, how Mom stopped answering the neighborhood calls about brunch. I overheard a voice, his friend from the betting shop, call Dad by name and joke about a new deadline. They were solvent only when someone else paid the bill. They were, in every sense that mattered, dependent. I started leaving small things in places where I knew they'd be found. Unpaid bills slipped between the pages of the newspaper they left on the porch, a past due notice placed gently under the teapot where my mother poured her morning tea. I didn't confront them. I didn't call out their sins. I let the paperwork do it. Bureaucracy rarely forgives a messy ledger. People began to notice. Neighbors whispered about late notices. A cousin called to ask if Dad was okay. Competitors at the card table grumbled but kept their distance. My mother's facade didn't crack all at once. She didn't do that, but she grew quieter at family gatherings, more measured with her smiles. The thing I wanted most was not to humiliate them in public. I wanted them to feel the cold practicality of consequence. Missed payments, a phone call they couldn't charm their way out of, the small erosion of status that comes when you discover your safety net has holes. I also prepared for when they would try to come for me. I learned the legal basics I needed to keep my son safe without lawyers, emergency numbers, shelters, community aid. That would help with short-term rent if I ever couldn't cover a week. I made friends at the center where my son liked the art class, people who'd watch him if I went to a late shift, who'd become witnesses to the life I was building. I kept my plans practical and small so there were no big dramas to fail. There was a moment, a quiet minute between closing the diner and sliding the keys into my pocket, when I realized something else. I didn't want revenge so much as independence. I wanted mornings where I could breathe and not calculate how much sin I owed to keep the house warm. I wanted my son to grow up knowing a mother who could say no. The idea of making him feel the weight of consequence, of letting him watch what happened when adults didn't keep their promises, felt like a truth I could live with. So I stopped paying. I let their debts be theirs. I let the collectors leave voicemails that stopped when they reached my number, because I no longer answered. I canceled the one service my father counted on for his fixes. I refused to be the bank for their next hand. I watched as their world, one built on borrowed money and other people's labor, shifted a degree at a time. It wasn't explosive, it wasn't dramatic, it was gradual and it was quiet. And in that quiet, I found a kind of power I hadn't known I owned. I slept through the night more than once, and each morning I opened another envelope and crossed off another goal. They told me I was replaceable. I learned that I was instead the one who could choose what to keep and what to let fall. By the time the collector called my father for the third time in a week, I had saved enough for a deposit on a small room that smelled like paint and possibility. I signed the lease with a steady hand, rolled the mattress into the back of my car, and drove away while the sun was still low and the town was waking up. When I looked in the rear view, their house was a pale rectangle among trees. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was running. I felt like I was moving. A week after moving, the silence felt like a luxury I didn't know I could afford. No yelling, no calls, no footsteps pacing the hallway demanding something I didn't owe. Just the hum of the fridge, the click of my son's pencil as he did his homework, and the sound of my own breath not shaking anymore. Then, one night, my mother showed up. It was late, 11:45 p.m., when I heard the knock. Heavy, urgent. My heart jumped, but I didn't open right away. Through the peephole I saw her, hair disheveled, makeup smeared, eyes wild. "Please," she said when I cracked the door. "Your father. They took everything. The car, the furniture. He's hiding. They'll come for me next." I didn't feel the pity she wanted. "You mean they came for what you owed?" I said quietly. "You don't understand," she snapped. "They'll kill him." "I understand perfectly." I replied. "I told you I couldn't keep paying. You made me pay anyway. Now you can't buy your way out either." Her lips trembled. "You sound just like him." "No," I said. "I sound like someone who learned from him." She looked over my shoulder, her voice lowering. "You'd let your own father die?" I stared at her. "He's already killed enough of me." The door closed on her face before I could see if she had more to say. Her fist hit the wood once, then twice, then silence. I leaned against the door until her footsteps faded down the hall. 2 days later, I heard through a neighbor that my father had been arrested outside a casino, yelling, broke, refusing to leave until someone gave him credit. My mother packed a bag and disappeared. No calls, no texts. The quiet became permanent. Months passed. My son grew taller. I found laughter again in small things. His school projects, late-night cartoons, the way the world didn't collapse if I said no. I didn't become rich, but I became free. Sometimes, when I walked past the old diner window and saw my reflection, I saw the bruises that weren't there anymore. The mark of the cord had faded, but the memory hadn't. And yet, I smiled, because pain was no longer my inheritance. Silence was no longer my prison. My father once said I was the reason they suffered. Maybe he was right, because I finally made them feel what they made me live through: powerlessness, consequence, and loss. Except I didn't do it out of hate. I did it because for the first time I understood something he never did. Suffering doesn't end when you cause it to someone else. It ends when you stop letting it define you. And that's exactly what I did. I stopped being his victim. I became his reminder. Please subscribe to our channel and tell us in comments from where are you watching this video.